Here in the Chap Shop with Ross Publica for my chat, one of my mods. And we're going to talk today about the compatible left. We're going to do a takedown of the compatible left. Yeah.
Little surprise, like, you know, chokehold or something. And then, like, yeah, take them down. Be like, go to sleep.
So, sleeper.
Go to sleep.
Oh, I love the sleeper.
Yeah.
This is already
everybody
good.
loves a sleeper.
Ross, love your face. Let's define the compatible left, because we're here talking about something that I think we've identified is a problem, and we're gonna talk more about that. But it's a problem because it supports the enemy. It supports the big bad thing in the room. You know, it supports the thing that we should not be supporting. Which is imperialism. It's imperialism. Just gonna throw that out
absolutely.
there.
And I think we'll probably get into that a little bit deeper, but the way that has developed. But ultimately, the final impact is they do act as agents for imperialism, whether they necessarily intend to or not.
Agents like CIA. We're talking more compatible left, as in, people who get away, existing in leftist, especially here in the imperial core, especially here in the United States, people who get away with, being in leftist or progressive-ish spaces, be them social media sort of cliques, or if what else, organizations, NGOs, content creators.
You have different kind of people who opine on Twitter, who are considered maybe thought leaders. There's definitely lots of people who in many ways contribute to the conversation and influence people in ways that I think we are identifying as problematic for the goal of socialism.
Yeah, the goal of, not just socialism here, but of course abroad.
Absolutely.
Around the world.
I mean, it's not socialism unless it's international, right?
I think so. We are going to peek at this video, homie, of multipolarista. Ben Norton goes into detail about a little bit of the history of the compatible left, and I figured it would be nice for us to watch it together and to watch with chat and whatnot. He describes the compatible left, and we'll watch it again as CIA terminology. This is how they describe this group of people. So, sort of shows in a sense, or at least that sort of serves as evidence that the compatible left, they are they can be in effect tools of the CIA if they're not paying attention, and I do believe that they are. Before we get into it more, do you want to peek at that video? Would that be good?
I did watch it.
You did watch it. Should we watch it with chat?
Yeah, I think so.
All right, let's do that then. Ross, let's do this here. Let's go ahead and peek at how the CIA supports a compatible left to aid U.S. imperialism. This is Multipolarista and Ben Norton discussing this here. Nice, tidy 13-minute video. I figured we watch it together, and then we'll talk more about this, and we'll just talk about all the high level ideas. You know what I mean? Okay, here we go.
I'm going to talk about how
Is that really the audio?
Imperialism has been one of the key elements, one of the key issues that has led to split.
I thought it was just my iPad when I was listening earlier. Jesus.
Historically within the left, especially within the so-called Western left, and how many of those splits are not necessarily even organic splits. I want to focus on the role of states, specifically the U.S. government, in facilitating and encouraging these splits within the left and trying to create what the CIA has long called a compatible left. The CIA has also referred to it as a non-communist left. I think we have to really understand that going back really.
Something he said was really important there, which was the anti-communist or not communist left. And in so many conversations, we're finding that we have people who have identified themselves as leftists, but do not have any sort of basis in dialectical materialism. It's just they've gone off vibes, and they're still basically liberals with maybe more social, pro-social aesthetic. So yeah, the anti-communist, non-communist leftist is, I think, a key issue with what we're talking about.
Yeah. I think we're identifying perhaps, and you can help me if you let me know if you agree or disagree here, but there's sort of a spectrum here of compatible leftists, and I think we're identifying at least part of it here, which is that there is the anti-communist left, and they're like the progressives, and they're also anti-communists. They would disagree with much of our analysis about everything, pretty much everything. But they call themselves leftists at the same time. But it's just like, well, but you at the same time they support imperialism, or at the very least they hate the people who are most anti-imperialist. They're anti-imperialist.
The people who refer to themselves as leftists, it sort of reminds me of, Plato said that a man is a featherless biped. And so Diogenes went and found a chicken and plucked it and brought it to the forum and said, "Behold a man." And so obviously part of the issue was in defining accurately, what it was. So if we're not accurately defining what a leftist is, if we're not taking that into account, then if we're not careful, people can pass themselves off as a featherless chicken.
A featherless chicken. That's wild. Because I was calling myself a leftist before I was an anti-imperialist. And it's only been the last year and a half where I've, embraced, my anti-imperialism or whatever. So, I'll just say it can happen to anybody. Anyway.
Yeah. I'd like to think that we all grow, and we all learn. A separate issue, and not to digress too far down that road, is that we do have people who have adopted leftist aesthetics, and are in no way progressives or liberals. People like Haas, who are not communists, who are fascists, who have infiltrated or pretended to be leftists. And they should be, and I think have been revealed as such, and are largely not taken seriously by anyone, except for the few people who confuse Haas, Hinkle, and Maupin, that group, confuse them with leftists. So yeah, screw those guys.
Screw these guys. Here he is.
But let's not fixate on them when we're talking about the compatible left.
Of course, this is not the compatible left, but it's fun to make fun of them, and their ill-fitting suits. Hat sock clowns. They act like they're leftists.
Yeah.
Anyways.
They talk about, class warfare, class struggle. They use the dialogue of leftism. They use the vocabulary of Marxist-Leninists, but ultimately, when you listen long enough, it's just gibberish.
Baby talk, as Comrade Parenti would say.
Absolutely.
When you think without Marx, when you think without class analysis.
Yeah, right. And they're all part of this like LaRoucheite cult thing.
Mm-hmm.
And he's a fascist, so screw that guy too, but he's dead. Got
him.
Yeah, got him.
Back to this year.
The key issue that has led to
imperialism
within existing socialist parties and organizations.
Okay, so again, imperialism is the issue that has led to the splits here.
Go back to the Second International, which split in 1916 over the fundamental question, the contradiction of World War I. And Vladimir Lenin and his allies famously denounced the Social Democrats who supported World War I as social chauvinists. And this led to the split within numerous social democratic parties, including within Russia itself. I mean, let's not forget that the party was called the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party at the time. The Bolsheviks were technically social democrats at that moment. But that was the historical moment at which social democrats became identified as those who supported imperialism, and communists, the new creation of the Communist Party of Germany and the Spartacus League before that, and then eventually the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. The Communist movement and the Third International became associated with anti-imperialism. So I think we need to understand that going back to that important history, the question of imperialism and anti-imperialism has been fundamental to understanding the international left and the splits that have emerged within it. And after the Bolshevik Revolution and after World War I, the US government began investing more and more resources in the first and then the second Red Scares into encouraging these splits. And I want to focus on an organization that is not well known, but I think anyone who considers himself a socialist or even a progressive needs to understand the history of the so-called Congress for Cultural Freedom. And we now have declassified documents. This is well substantiated in research by scholars like Gabriel Rockhill, who I would definitely invite everyone here to check out his very important scholarship. Also, Joel Whitney has a book called Thinks, about how the CIA encouraged certain strands of left-wing thought, literary thought. And there's another great book by Francis Stoner Saunders called The Cultural Cold War. All of these books document how after World War II, the CIA encouraged the creation of a non-communist left, or a compatible left, they called it, that was pretty explicitly imperialist, or at very least anti-imperialist, you could say.
There you go.
We know that the CIA funded many journals and publications, including the Partisan Review. The CIA also funded many musicians and artists and prominent cultural figures who pushed a kind of pro-imperialist or anti-imperialist left-wing politic. We know, for instance, that the godmother of bourgeois liberal feminism, Gloria Steinem, was herself a CIA agent. And you
want to watch this video?
Yeah, I did watch that short, and
let's check this out.
This is revealing.
Gloria Steinem discusses her time in the CIA.
Gloria, at the festival, you worked for the Independent Research Service.
That's right.
Well, exactly when did your own association with the CIA start, and in what fashion? Did they come to you, or did you go to them?
In 1958, when I came home from India, I discussed with student leaders, past and present, many of them active with the National Student Association, this kind of small foundation to encourage Americans to go. They thought it was a good idea, too. I was then told by foundations and professors and friends that I should not do this, that I would get in trouble with the House Un-American Activities Committee, the American Legion, all of those 50s people. And I became convinced that it was impossible. It was at that point that the student leaders said to me that they had in the past received funds for international programs from the CIA, and that they felt that this was important and could also be partly funded by the CIA.
Well, I mean, did you feel that you really tried? I mean, did you go around to all of the wealthy private foundations, wealthy private people, and explain your point of view, and explain why you felt it was important that the United States be represented at these things in a certain way? What did they tell you?
They told me that, well, the Ford Foundation, for instance, told me that they thought we were too liberal and too controversial, and that we would endanger their cultural programs in Austria. I mean, the first festival was being held in Vienna. It was not encouraging at all, and the private individuals to whom I went often had particular points of view to put forward, which would have been much, much more restricting than the CIA funds were, which were free. I mean, no one was told what to say.
What do you mean they were free? You mean to say it was easier for you to work for the CIA than a private organization?
That's right. And the reason I think that comes as a surprise, as it did to me at the time. I mean, I had the conventional liberals' view of the CIA as a right-wing incendiary group, and I was amazed to discover that this was far from the case, that they were enlightened, liberal, nonpartisan activists of the sort who characterized the Kennedy administration, for instance.
You have not been working now for the CIA since 1962. You still criticize. You were down recently in Washington?
Yes, when the story broke that I had that I had for 4 years been a Central Intelligence agent, I was demonstrating outside the Pentagon underneath Mr. McNamara's office against bombing in Vietnam. And this didn't precisely fit with the image of a CIA agent, but then neither does the CIA.
You cannot waterboard that information out of me.
They will work with anybody and do whatever they can to co-opt and redirect, whatever your energy is, if it is in any way challenging to, the capital's hegemony. Yeah, you can't take money from the CIA. I'm sorry. It raises too many questions about integrity. Same thing with NED funding. Like when we see an organization that has that, we gotta be like, oh, God damn it. Like, okay, like what's up with them? Like, what are they like? Okay, like what countries do they work in and why? What beef do we have with those countries and why? Like what? So it's always just money reveals so much about motivations and how the world works. It's such the world is built on the accumulation of it. So, of course, it is a driving factor for many.
Yeah. And of course, we're just saying money. But of course, small change can really influence people. But of course, wealth is where power lies.
Right.
And the NED hold that. And they will give it to folks and organizations who not necessarily, it doesn't have to be like this big tinfoil hat thing where they have to go to the CIA headquarters and sign up for all this top secret stuff. No, they just find people that are easily co-optable because they already are on the compatible left. They are already part of a community of communities where there's no dialectical understanding, where they don't understand the opposing forces driving history.
Ensuring that those voices, the ones that they want heard, are the ones that are heard, and that voices that actually do challenge, capital or patriarchy or white supremacy are marginalized.
Imperialism, yeah. So these compatible leftists, we're starting to figure out some of these types. Maybe we can do a sort of a left to right breakdown of them. So we're talking about people who, the farthest left that they get are people who call themselves communists, even, but they hate actually existing communist countries.
I think it's more common to hear somebody refer to themselves as a leftist and then hate, like actually existing communist or socialist nations.
True.
More than communists. I think a lot of people are still afraid to call themselves communists.
Yeah. Right. Okay, but I think you're absolutely right. Generally speaking, more of them who are compatible leftists, they're just generally just like socialists, dem socks, sock dem types, progressive types.
People who want to reform capitalism and have the social benefits
anti-capitalists,
a kinder, gentler capitalism.
They hate authoritarians.
Right.
They hate authoritarians more than they hate oftentimes capitalism itself, despite saying they're anti-capitalist.
As if capitalism doesn't maintain an authoritarian hold on our lives.
As if. So you're starting to get an idea of the types. How about we think of some content creators that fit into those boxes? Also, I would say like libertarian, like people who sort of fit into leftish spaces without necessarily calling themselves leftists. I think fucking Vaush, even though he's more
he's
libertarian.
Definitely not a comrade. In that respect, I know that he's had some positive advocacy he's done in other spheres. That's not always great, but as far as talking about socialism, talking about communism, talking about dialectical analysis, and looking at the material realities of the world, no, he doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. He thinks that you should be listening to neoliberals about foreign policy, and neoliberals have gotten us into this mess.
There's no reason to ever trust a lefty on any foreign policy issue. If you take any leftist and ask them a foreign policy issue, you're probably good to just do the opposite. You should trust neoliberals over lefties on foreign policy issues. I'm not even joking when I say that.
Like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, really? So no, like Vaush, I don't know what that dude is, but it seems to be at best some sort of reform capitalism.
You're identifying a couple more types, or at least one more type, which is just liberals, people who just identify as liberals. They consider themselves leftist, but that only reveals that they're only leftist, and that only works here in the the United States. Liberals and neoliberals, people who support free market capitalism, wittingly or unwittingly, people who support deregulation, austerity, and privatization.
I was going to say, like, we can say, okay, somebody, to be quote unquote a leftist, or to be, if we're defining the things, if we're doing, it's honestly a little bit of gatekeeping.
I'm fine with that.
We should not necessarily define what it's against so much as what it's for. Okay. So we can say we're anti-capitalist and anti-imperialist, which is great. Everyone should be. You can too. But what we're talking about building, or what we're wanting to build, is something to replace capitalism. And what we want to replace it with is something that's informed by science. And the best science that we have is through a dialectical process, through the scientific process of testing and analysis. So we've had multiple experiments in socialism, varying degrees of success. As with any experiment, you take the results, you change some of the parts of your test, and you adapt. If you do not have the foundational understanding that capitalism is collapsing and that socialism is going to be the best way of organizing resources and labor to ensure a prosperous society that nurtures human growth, socialism is going to do that. If you don't know that, in your bones, if you're not 100% certain, we need to talk about it.
Right.
Because, to be able to go out into the world, successfully advocate for these things and talk about these topics, you need to be sure. And I think a lot of people aren't certain. They think that capitalism's just, it'll get better. Or it'll change and the things will happen, and maybe there'll be some unions, and we'll change the Supreme Court a little bit, and maybe we vote. But you don't realize that we're like an economic downturn and a Republican president away from having like a genocide in the United States. So it's you gotta stop living in a PG world. It's a rated R world. There is a class war. Their class is winning. If you don't want feudalism, which is bad, we need to talk about socialism. And for people who don't even accept that capitalism is collapsing and is in free fall, like those people are deluded or ignorant. I'm sorry. So we need to like A, hit them with the facts. Capitalism, bad, collapsing, not gonna work. So then you only got two things left. Fucking feudalism, which doesn't work out great for us, the people who don't own shit, or socialism, where we prioritize collaboration and, you know, community and teamwork and, you know, satisfying people's basic needs rather than, you know, filling the empty void of chasing profit. So yeah, if you're a leftist because of vibes, if you're a communist because of vibes, if you just sort of want things to get better and you don't believe that things are getting worse, if you don't know it for a fact, and if you aren't certain that there is something that we can do to replace the shitty system that we have, get sure. We need to talk. If you're not sure, we need to get sure, because those are the conversations that we have to have. Until people understand that, that's the education. Then we can organize, because then people are like, well, fuck, the world's falling apart. What are we going to do? Now you're asking the right questions.
We're trying to say that a lot of folks on the compatible left perhaps think that we can reform our way out of this, or what?
I think part of it is the realization that like we're not necessarily going to see the good times. And the problem is so big, and you know, it just seems insurmountable. And you know, really I just got to like keep my head down and collect my paycheck and take care of, you know, my circle, and the world's mostly going to take care of itself as long as like nobody's coming for me with the pitchforks. You know, it'll be okay. Like, yeah, we use child labor in other parts of the world. Yeah, we have people in this country who don't have drinkable water or food or healthcare. But you know, like, I make, you know, $200,000 a year on my YouTube show, so I don't have to necessarily advocate against imperialism or capitalism. I can get you upset enough to vote.
It applies to a ton of people. I wonder, like, you just subtweeted like 20 different people that I can think of in like 13 seconds here. Holy smokes. Get him, Ross. Get him.
I mean, I'm nobody, you know, so they don't have to listen to me. People in Germany leading up to the Holocaust, leading up to World War II, a lot of people didn't believe it either, that it was going to happen, that it was happening. There was a German like Jewish pro-Nazi social club. You know, people didn't believe it was going to get worse. People didn't believe it was going to be bad. And you know, the rhetoric got worse. You know, you continue to find you know, the target demographic. The economy is not in good shape, regardless of what the news is telling you. Like, we're keeping it afloat through, you know, our fiduciary bullshit science, which isn't like, it's all fiat currency because MMT. So the stock market's crap. Our economy's made up. The one thing we do have is that we can withhold our labor, and we can organize alternative means of support, supporting one another in our community. And so those alternative means of supporting, ourselves and our communities aren't voting. Those alternative means of supporting the communities doing things like getting involved in a local garden if you have time, you know, volunteering, fucking anywhere, just be involved and connect with people. Somebody's like, oh, I want to change the world. I want to do good. Feed somebody, make somebody a sandwich, you know, like you might just save somebody's life making a sandwich. You don't know how big or how small your impact is, but we do know that it all adds up.
This is the Ida and Simpson show where Ross Publica tells women to make him a sandwich.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I think we know who we're talking about.
Yeah.
We're talking about people who don't have a dialectical material analysis,
Heck.
who don't know that capitalism is collapsing and it's bad. Or who, who capitalism, I guess, isn't bad enough for them yet. So like I'm 37, and when I was brought home from the hospital, I was born in the United States. I was brought home to a tool shed that's smaller than this room I'm in.
Oh.
It didn't have running water or electricity. We actually had to run an extension cord from the condo next door so that we could have light. Like there is serious poverty and hunger in this country, the one that we live in. There is serious need. And there are so many ways that we can help each other that don't necessarily require donating to a charity or, volunteering with a political program or whatever. We need to be the organizers. We need to be the people who are doing the work, laying the foundation. I think that the concept of like a vanguard party is a little bit antiquated. And the reason why is that you're sending people first to lay the groundwork. A lot of I was in the military, and before we would deploy somewhere, we would send an early crew to set up, lay everything out, get the computers going, get the tools unpacked, get the, aircraft figured out where we want them. You lay the foundation, you set everybody up for success because maybe have a little bit more experience, a little bit more knowledge and know-how, maybe more connections. So you send an early crew who's a little bit more experienced to basically do more work. It isn't like a glorious position. It isn't necessarily like a thanked job. It's just, more. It's your work, your responsibility. So you do it. And so rather than like, Vanguard Party, intelligently superior, it's no, like, we need to get out there and do work. Get dirty, doing the work, leading by example, and showing the world that we want to build. Yeah, like everybody's busy and overwhelmed, and you gotta eat to live, and like nobody eats as healthy as they want. Nobody gets to work out as much as they want. Nobody gets to read as much as they want. And these are all things that capitalism has robbed us of. We had access to clean water and clean food at some point, and we don't anymore. Somebody made a choice. That choice was probably about profit. These are, in many ways, gifts that we hope to give the next generations that we may not necessarily get to enjoy ourselves. That's part of the dedication to the project. There isn't necessarily like a line of human existence. There isn't necessarily a start or an end in the way that we tend to think of time as like a linear thing. And it, humanity is a changing experience. And so we're going to evolve and change as a society. Our economy necessarily is going to change and evolve out of just the very fact that capitalism will be replaced by something. Regardless, the work we do is incredibly important. And not to say that like the internet's the revolution and like we're, you know, we're doing it, guys. We're the revolution. Because like the revolution isn't one thing. In history, there will be a date upon which they've decided that the history happened, the revolution happened. They'll write it down in the books. They'll be like, hey, October 14th, 2026, they did the revolution. And it's like, well, no, like the revolution started, in the 1930s, when people first started talking about labor unions and stuff like that. The revolution is, it's an ongoing experience. It is, but it is coming. Make no mistake. Know that. Be assured that capitalism is not sustainable, and we are seeing it in its death throes.
And it's coming despite the compatible left, not because of.
The compatible left is stopping people from realizing those truths, that capitalism is collapsing and that we need socialism. Yeah. And they do it by scaring you with the specter of authoritarianism. They do it by scaring you with the specter of losing your freedom, but they can't define what freedom is. And they, only tend to, define their freedoms in terms of like liberal values. Like I have free speech. Great. Fucking wonderful. What can you do with it?
Yeah.
Like what does freedom look like in a society where everyone has full access to food, shelter, education, and healthcare? What does that freedom look like?
I want to keep pointing at a couple different things that makes it so that the compatible left and compatible leftists are used as tools by right-wingers and fascists. In many ways, the compatible left agrees with fascists more than they agree with folks like me. It's pretty wild.
The one thing that fascists and anti-fascists agree upon is that liberals are only useful to fascists.
A lot of times they don't realize that they agree with fascists because they're voting for different people, here in the United States. The thought goes, oh, well, I'm not voting for the Republican, therefore I'm not voting for someone who supports fascism. Without realizing,
and really, it's you're voting for somebody that doesn't necessarily support fascism for Americans.
That's the thing. A lot of people stop thinking, hell, at the border of their state or the border of their country. They don't think outside the borders, and realizing that the United States is the biggest, is the most powerful country in the history of the world. So if we're voting for people that are supposed to hold, okay, it's like, how about the Afghanistan war, folks? Shouldn't someone be held accountable for the Afghanistan war in Iraq? Like, right? Shouldn't someone be held accountable for that? Well, no, they don't get held accountable. Okay? They're not. Because there's people that we send to hold them accountable don't do shit. I think they're scared of getting offed like they offed JFK. Let's talk about how the compatible left is dangerous. Let's talk more about that, because before I realized, before I knew what the compatible left was, I was like those people who were voting for people who would vote for imperialism, people who would do nothing about imperialism, people who would not stand against imperialism, or who would literally vote for it. I voted for Bernie Sanders. You know what I mean? That guy voted for bombing Yugoslavia.
Right.
And he was like the best choice we were given. Except we were not really given the choice, were we?
Right. Yeah, I was going to say.
If they take it away, it was never really given to us.
Yeah.
But that's a whole different podcast.
No kidding.
So they get co-opted by the right wing or by imperialism, because they end up voting for these people. So like they'll vote for Biden, right? Because in their heads they're like, well, I can't vote for Trump, and then they're sort of tricked into supporting whatever Biden does, because otherwise they look like fucking idiots. Because so then Biden's like doing this war in Ukraine. Well, I guess I got to support that because I'm a dumb fucking Democrat, and it's under Biden's watch.
No, I mean it's a bit like people who are really into sports where they've picked their team. So they're like, oh well, yeah, their ground game wasn't great, but it was because of so and so, and then they got to come up with excuses for all the stuff and justifications. I just don't want to play sports. Like we need to get rid of that sport and do a whole new sport. Like you like your team. I'm concerned about like the CTE. Like
exactly.
Great. You have your running game or whatever, but maybe don't have like grown men charging at each other with helmets. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not a doctor of brain science. Although I did teach a lot of people about neurobiology in my last job.
So by getting people to vote for the Bidens of the world, and by getting them to, tacitly or, passionately defend Biden's actions and that of his administration, a lot of times they get the compatible left, well-meaning people. Everyone means well, but if they don't have good theory and analysis, they're going to end up sometimes supporting bad things. Actually supporting the enemy while thinking you're going in opposition to the enemy. Things like imperialism itself, things like defending NATO.
An issue with liberalism is its ill-defined values. So if you do value freedom, then when somebody says, oh, well, they need the freedom to do this thing. Don't you value freedom?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Oh, well, I guess I do.
Oh, I love freedom. Right. I'll support it.
So that's why I like having a foundation in like a scientific, analysis. If we're trying to understand like the real material stuff in the world, like the things and how the things interact and work, like it needs to be based on science. Like, don't get me wrong. I like Xbox controller, and I suppose that Xbox controller can mean freedom to me, in a way, like freedom from boredom. Don't I have a right to be free from boredom? Yeah.
Freedom from boredom.
Yeah. But like that's not helpful, because what we know is that, there's children who are mining the materials that are go into the production of the Xbox. And that is a thing that needs to change. Am I willing to, talk about that? And that's the material reality. That's the stuff that we focus on, as people who adhere to the idea that we need to replace the current economic model with something that is based on science and is socialism. Compatible leftists won't say that because they're compatible with capitalism and imperialism. And what's not compatible with capitalism and imperialism? Communism and socialism. And if you're not a communist or socialist, are you a leftist?
Exactly. Otherwise, you stand for the status quo. That's why I call them reactionaries. At the very least, they're compatible left. And depending on how you define these words, I think they're reactionaries. If you're anti-Marxist, which is the primary critique of capitalism,
Yeah.
I don't know if I want to phrase it like that. It's a primary critique of capital. I don't know what I'm saying.
I mean, the Communist Manifesto is a critique of capital.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
when I have an issue with my tooth, I go to the dentist. When I have an issue with my ear, I go to ear, nose, and throat doctor. When I have questions about the economy, I go to economists and I learn from them.
Yeah.
So, like, if you don't have a foundational understanding of how capitalism works, and if you don't understand Marx's critiques of capitalism, and then you also don't sort of get what is being proposed by Marxist Leninists, which is like, a communism, socialism. Well, then I don't care what your critique is. What do you know? You're like, so great. You have an opinion. It's an uninformed opinion. Wonderful. I don't care.
Yeah.
Like, you're just, like, it's if I have a cavity and I'm like, hey, Dan, what should I do with my cavity? And you're like, I don't know, drink some bleach. I'm like, oh yeah, okay, I'm gonna drink some bleach because everybody has valid opinions, I guess, and we're just taking everybody's advice
Oh
on
my
shit,
God,
despite not, thinking about it. Yeah, so don't drink bleach.
You heard it here first, kids. It's an educational show. Bad for you. Bleach.
Yeah, it's not good. I knew a guy actually who survived.
Okay. You know what else is bad? Neoliberalism. We mentioned, the four main things of neoliberalism before.
Fapt.
Free market capitalism, austerity, privatization, deregulation. Okay. The neoliberals in the United States and the owning and ruling classes, and this is where the money gets into it here even more. This is why they invest in heavily in getting their picks in Congress and Supreme Court, president, etc., deep state, all these unelected positions as well. They get their picks. And they do it so that they can build neoliberalism worldwide.
Oh yeah,
all around the world. And they do
unimpeded neoliberalism.
And they do it via soft power, like these NGOs, these liberal think tanks, human rights think tanks, freedom think tanks, democracy think tanks, all these imperial dog whistles at this point, which just get people here in the imperial core to just shut their brain off for a couple minutes so that these imperial propagandists and neoconservatives can slip in their weird propaganda. You know what I mean? Their neoliberal, neoconservative propaganda. Okay, so and then, or they do it, a little bit more explicitly via regime change or military coups, what have you. Okay, compatible leftists. They see, like, if you're going to consider yourself a leftist, I think you got to ask yourself whether or not you stand against the biggest evil in the world, the biggest, I say in the room, sometimes I describe it as a, the worst actor in the room. You know what I mean? And then ask yourself who's supporting those people. And if you think that you are among the most propagandized people in the history of the world, yet you've never been tricked into doing that, and that you're not even maybe doing it now, I think you're being foolish. And I'm trying to also check with myself all the time. When am I doing this? I don't want to be doing this. So many people are doing that intentionally or unintentionally, or worse yet, intentionally. And we can get to that too. But there's so many people who don't realize that they end up supporting the enemy without realizing, while thinking that they are sort of opposing the enemy. But the enemy is neoliberalism. The enemy is this free market economy. It's the economy, stupid. The enemy is policing and stuff. And that's another example that the compatible left ends up doing. They end up acting as sheepdog herders. You know what I'm saying? Like they're just herding all the sheep into voting for Dems and sort of like wasting that energy that you get when you look around the world and you see the problems that we all see. And you want to do something about it. What they do
Right.
is they trick us into just taking that energy and voting. Vote, 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 vote. And organize. Or, go door to door for your favorite politician. Spend this energy on voting, 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 voting. And then of course your guy loses and you're like, what the fuck was that all about? It was clearly
Great, I voted.
fixed. You know what I mean? It was clearly fixed to begin with, and I just spent all that time and energy. What the fuck happened there? Okay, go on. Hit me.
Recently went to a county fair thing, and so they actually had like a sheepdog demonstration, and it's interesting because those dogs are able to do and make the sheep do so much. They can, walk them into like a little small gated area. They can, group them into like a hoop. They can like pick one and split them off. Very, very, very talented dogs, able to, with a handler, accomplish a lot.
Yeah. I see what
and
you did
I
there.
don't know why I think of that so much.
I see what you did there.
Yeah. So yeah, we should definitely go into the handler part, because I mean, if we're talking about manufacturing consent and Amy Goodman and like the role that the compatible left within like the content creation media sphere, their role as sheepdogs is to keep you from wandering too far away from the flock. And if you're part of the flock, you're a sheep.
Yeah. And we get people in the chat, homie, all the time that they're like, oh, but I watched them. And like all these other people that I think we could describe as compatible left, Majority Report, Young Turks, etc., etc. And they'll say, oh, but they pulled me left. It's like, but no, their whole purpose is not to pull you left. If they
Right.
pulled you left, it was despite what they were trying to do.
And the question that I think not enough people ask about people like Amy is, what is she trying to do?
What is she trying to do?
Is she is her mission statement? Is she, is she a communist? Is she trying to, show the reveal the truth and show like the hidden crap that is capitalism? Or is she like reading off State Department talking points and occasionally covering Israel to maintain her integrity as a journalist or whatever? If so, then we need to acknowledge that, know her bias so that we can critique it appropriately and, I guess have an accurate analysis of the world.
Question in chat, does her analysis deviate wildly from things the State Department would agree with? And for me, that's the litmus test. And I'm not saying that helps you to determine whether or not they're doing it intentionally. But if you do this test and it tests positive over and over and over and over and over, in fact, you watch it every single day and you notice that she's doing it every single day as you're testing with your little litmus test, at some point you got to go, what the fuck is going on here? You got to be joking me. Amy, come on, homie. You're like, she relies on this thing that when I watched her uncritically, I was just like, oh, okay. I don't have that much time this week. I'm going to pull up Democracy Now! And I'm going to be informed. You know what I mean? I'm going to feel informed after I watch this.
Yeah. No, and that's not happening.
And eventually that feeling went away. And it was replaced with, what the fuck are they doing here? If you can't tell the difference between what they're saying and State Department propaganda, you can call this Dan Simpson's razor, but like more than likely it's State Department propaganda. And they don't have to be doing. They don't have to be like on their payroll to be doing it.
But no, absolutely not.
Yeah, okay.
And so, like, is she pushing back against her sources? Is she like, what is really the level of journalism that's happening at Democracy Now? Um, who's making the decisions on what stories they cover versus what stories they don't cover. There's a lot going on there, and we don't necessarily know the motivations behind why they necessarily cover things the way they do. But we have found on many occasions that their coverage has been explicitly from the U.S. perspective,
Uh,
with seemingly no attempt at even engaging in a perspective that might be counter to it.
Yeah.
I just
Yeah.
I can't say that she's an unbiased source.
She sort of never shows that other side. She always shows, for instance, the anti-China side of things. That's one of the examples of the compatible left, is that you can tell them anything about China and they believe you. it's really sad, actually, because it ends up fucking over people in China, the very people that they claim to care about, and we can go into depth about that maybe, but yeah, they end up. One of the things that Amy Goodman does is, and this is one thing that compatible leftists do, is platforming.
Mhm.
And they could do it from a variety of different angles. There's a bunch of different kinds of people you could platform. One type of person they platform, and they do it on Democracy Now!, so I'll lead with this one, is, and we've talked about this in the past, is this like Uyghur activist. So, and that's just like one instance where they're more than happy to bring someone on to support their talking point, which again is you can't tell the difference between their talking point and a State Department talking point, which means it's probably a State Department talking point. And they bring them on, and it's just so shameless. In fact, she like led with, "Oh, I was just last week talking with my friends over at the Hudson Institute," and there's just no recognition from Amy, and and they've had her on in the past, and it's just sort of clear that, like, how did they not know that this lady's lying? At first, one time they have her on, she's talking about 2 million Uyghurs in these camps, and it's really terrible and bad and unimaginable, and you know, of course, these people will believe anything they read about China. And then the next time they have her on, it's down to 1 million. It's just like, okay, did they shuttle them out in mass? Like, what is going? So it's just like they have them on. Another thing the compatible left does, and if you have other examples of that, but that's just a clear example of when they bring on someone from the NGO sphere of influence, which is explicitly neoconservative if you're reading between the lines. Okay. Then they also bring on fascists, like literal Nazis, and like right wingers, far right fascists, and like people that, you know, don't have like a Nazi tattoo on their neck or anything like that, but are far right fascists. And I'm thinking of what's that guy's name? Lance from the Serfs.
Yeah, that one time he brought on Laura Southern. And so with platforming, it's incredibly dangerous, I think, to bring on a like media trained person
Yes.
to discuss something that's serious.
Yeah.
Unless you're very well prepared.
Yes.
Because you can't we can't afford to lose that much. Like legitimizing Laura Southern in that way. Like I think that broadly speaking, Lance acknowledged that it wasn't his best performance. Yeah, Lauren Southern has an incredibly dangerous ideology. She is a white ethno-nationalist who attempted to obstruct a boat that was going to rescue migrants fleeing war from going to rescue them, which, you know, would have resulted in them drowning to death. The attention that she drew to that the migrants coming into the country contributed to a change in policy that has led to more migrant deaths. It has to do. There's a video of her on a boat and she's waving a road flare, and she has a shitty chant. She's just being an international Karen. I think of some of the debate platform or debate channels that have been on this platform, and sort of the spectacle that was created. The problem was that like there was never a resolution to any of those debates. It was all just flash and glitz and storyline and people having beef. Um, if they were talking about actual uh, validity of like whether or not trans people are exist.
Uh,
If at the end of that conversation, like some of those people don't move on their position, well, then you call them transphobes,
yeah.
and you sure as hell don't bring them back on to talk about fucking trans issues. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. It just seems. But like, if you're content brained, if you're if you've decided that you're going to pay your rent based off that,
Ugh.
I guess that is what it is. Um, I guess I don't expect people without like principles or values to act as if they have principles or values.
Right. So compatible leftists are bad. Not as bad as a fascist.
Well, they're not compatible with communists. They're not compatible
Not
with
compatible with
MLs.
us.
They're not compatible with socialism. I'm reminded of my trench test. World War I. If I'm in a trench and I got, I'm on watch or whatever, and my squad is sleeping in the trench behind me, and I see somebody, slide into the trench, and
Yeah.
they start running at me. Well, I don't have a whole lot of time to figure out if they're a good guy or a bad guy. Maybe I can't necessarily see what kind of uniform they got. If it's not real clear who they are, they're not going to get by me. Better announce yourself.
Yeah.
I have people to care about and protect. There's something that we're nurturing, here that I think is worth protecting. Straight up, like if you're trying to, reform capitalism because you want to be a landlord one day, I don't know you. Like fuck, get out of here. Like you're obviously you don't got it. Like you don't understand what we're talking about.
Hey guys.
If your like biggest values are the acquisition of status symbols, like maybe our values aren't necessarily aligned the same. Like people, yeah, like if you need a car, you need a car, and it's nice to have a car that works and that's clean. But like, I don't need a BMW or a Mercedes. I don't need any. Like, I have a car that works. It's modest. It's great. It's a Subaru. It does fine in Maine where it's fucking cold. When your values change, like the way that you go about living, it changes too. And the things you value and what you're willing to do for those things change too. There's all sorts of things that I'm just not willing to do anymore because my values have changed. So I guess those are just compromises I'm not willing to make because I value my integrity.
Ross, do you feel like we've identified why the compatible left is sort of dangerous?
Yeah, they're only useful to fascists.
They're more useful to fascists than people who, yes, we're gatekeeping, are on the actual left.
Liberals are only useful to fascists. They're not useful to us.
They're useful for Dems. I'm sorry, I just repeated you. Sorry. Again, like Dems, they support cops, homies. And they support imperialism, aka US fascism, globally. So yeah, they are fascists. Prove me wrong. They're fascists with civility politics. And they get us, and they've gotten us to vote for them for so long. I don't know about you, but I'm just simply uninterested in voting for someone like that.
I vote out of so I knew the governor, like who the people involved in the governor's race quite a bit.
Yeah.
So like we had LePage running, and he had previously been the governor. and he had cut quite a bit of funding to like social services, um, food for families, elder care, uh, harm reduction funding, not like harm reduction voting that people talk about, but like harm reduction services like syringe exchanges and stuff like that. Um, so he was running to come back and replace the Democratic governor, who was a former attorney general. Not great, but certainly better in those respects. So I think at the maybe state and local level, voting does make sense. It does. It can make some changes. Um, at the federal level, depending on what district you're in, maybe your vote counts more than it doesn't. But of course, we're only going to be given certain kinds of candidates, none of whom are going to be revolutionary. Um, so, decide how you want to spend your time. But only you can value, your off time, because of capitalism, our on the job time is valued for us. So, do what feels right. You got to do what's genuine to you.
Ross, what is to be done about the compatible left?
Well,
yeah, I don't know.
I think we should all strive to continue to educate ourselves as best we can,
Okay.
To find communities where we do find ourselves growing, do find ourselves inspired. Um, and there are some people here who are just here to be entertained, and that's what they're on the website for, and that's great. Um, some people have come to Twitch on account of COVID and have found communities online. I think that in the same way that people would feel protective of their neighborhoods if their neighborhoods were under threat by armed vigilantes and white nationalists who mean the people in that community harm, nobody would be surprised that might be protective of that community. So yeah, like I guess you can call it gatekeeping, but I think it's worth protecting. And like I'm not the final say on who's the communist, but listen to what people say, um,
Yeah.
and how they say it. Pay attention to what their motivations are. Why are they doing the things they're doing? Why are they producing the content that they make? Is it because it's easy and not like personally challenging, and it draws viewers, so you're able to sustain yourself? Maybe. I don't know. That's certainly going to be some people's things. Keep educating, organizing, agitating, and finding that community. We are fundamentally collaborative and compassionate beings. Humanity would not have survived this long if that wasn't true. And that's why I think that ultimately socialism will win out, because we are a collaborative species. And socialism is collaboration. I think capitalism and largely Western sort of society has poisoned our minds with this terminal individualism. We've been alienated from nature, one another, our communities, ourselves. So people consider themselves as consumers rather than as producers. Then they're totally disconnected from the fact that like the stuff they produce has some relation to the stuff they consume. And we're just so atomized and not really given the tools to contemplate the very complex world that we live in. So we're given very simple narratives for children, like we're the good guys and they're the bad guys. And if you do good and work hard, you will be rewarded because the world is just. And it's easy to identify who the good guys are because they have a badge and a gun. And we get these really simple narratives, and then we try to apply them to a very complex world, and you end up sounding like a child.
But are we done with this topic, the compatible left? Is there anything else that we want to mention? What is there to do? For me, it's like it's a contradiction. And it's a contradiction that's not fully realized. It wasn't fully... I'm acting like I'm the understander over here because I'm like, I was just about to say, I didn't fully realize it until last week. But it's just like, come on, I'm gonna learn more about this as I go. But I didn't come to I don't know, a better understanding, a clearer understanding until just about like last week when I started to identify, or the week before or whatever, when I started to identify Sam Seder and his role over there at Majority Report. And we've noticed that Amy Goodman's fit inside this role, but it's just I'm starting to notice a pattern, and then there's like this content creator sphere of influence, this compatible left sphere of influence that I think we're starting to notice more and more and more and more. So this is a contradiction that I don't think goes away. It has no chance of going away. I think we can agree at the very least that if we don't identify the contradiction and bring it to light and force it and make fun of these people and take their lunch money and whatever. So I don't know, what else can we do? I don't know. I'm gonna keep talking about them, I guess.
We continue to identify the contradictions. We don't watch a whole lot of Majority Report content over here anyways.
Oh, thanks.
But when doing the dialectical materialism, which we love, and we identify contradictions, we can try to like raise those contradictions to the people or the content creators in which we find those contradictions and attempt to resolve them, or maybe help. Maybe we're wrong. That's a possibility.
Out it.
But they are, ultimately responsible for themselves and their audience, and we can do the best we can for this community, and point out when there's contradictions in the analysis from other content creators. But we should also remember that they're not using the same tools of analysis we are. They're going to be wrong because they're going off vibes. That's not a great analytical tool for figuring out stuff.
Yeah, they're dangerous. They're just, at the end of the day, they're manufacturing consent tacitly or explicitly for empire.
Liberals
what
are only useful to fascists.
Okay, to be fair, I am a communist, and they give me a lot of content these days. You know what I'm talking about? We're going to talk about... I hate these guys. And now I have to force a contradiction now that I see it.
Yeah. When you can't unsee it. And
she said,
when it's like so obvious that it requires reconciliation, like it's become the elephant in the room. Like, are you sure you're a leftist?
A leftist.
Because you say you don't want to overthrow capitalism, and you seem to, support NATO, and your major way of telling people to engage is electoralism, and you keep quoting the State Department. Are you really a leftist?
Right.
Come on. Yeah. And if push comes to shove, which side are you coming down on? There's no civilians on the battlefield. Trench test. Whose side you on?
Wrap it up there?
Yeah.
All right, Ross. This has been great. Love your face. We'll talk to you again soon.
All right, chat.
Thanks.
I love you, Dan. I miss your musk.
Love your face, homie. We'll see you again. I hope soon. Okay.
Yep.
All right. That was the bit. This is it. Everyone, thank you for supporting the channel. Support on Patreon and subscribe on YouTube today. The struggle continues. The struggle continues.
They failed.
Oh, that was the wrong button.